Hi guys, just here to jump into this week's discussion on young adult literature, but also specifically realistic fiction. And I think it does have a critical role in our reading instruction, or it should, just because of, there's a multitude of reasons, but really when it comes down to it, there's this theme of, I really believe that it's our job to not be only developing multifaceted and well-rounded students, we're developing well-rounded humans as well, people who are able to critically think and self-analyze. And that's something that I really think realistic fiction helps with. So I guess I'll jump into chapter 4 and this idea of censorship. And on page 91, I really like the quote that censorship is tied very closely to intellectual freedoms. And on page 90, you'll see it says it has all these lists of things that are typically like the most censored topics. These are homosexuality and explicit language, sexual education, this idea of like the family unit not being traditional or negative. And so for me, that kind of is a little scary just because I think that it's promoting this idea of like a traditional and very like small box as to what is considered appropriate or like clean. And this whole chapter honestly really made me think of the video that a lot of us had to watch for our practical replacement. And that would be the Penny Kettle and Kelly Gallagher video, where they really discuss this idea of helicopter parenting or helicopter teaching. That's that concept of trying to shield students from every hardship that they could ever face. And basically what they say is that this is just more damaging in the long run, that because students, first of all, are going to face challenges anyway. I'm going to talk about that next. But also, we're basically creating this idea of like taboo and this inability to talk about hard and difficult things. And it's something that, it's not included in our syllabus, it's not included here. And then it also creates this idea that these issues and hardships and problems aren't common. They're not something that everyone is going through. So then students, when they do have potentially death in the family or something difficult goes on, they feel like, I'm the only one who's experiencing this. So there's countless reasons why I think that realistic fiction is so important to have in our ELA classrooms. But going, I guess, on into chapter 5, I really like that they talk about how realistic fiction in the young adult genre can help in navigating the travails of growing up, and includes characters with whom young adults can identify, because that really just brought me right back to chapter 1 and what we were talking about, what makes up young adult literature. How can we classify it? And it had to include these issues and concepts that are relatable to the teenage experience. And realistic fiction is exactly that. It's all in the name. These are realistic issues. And yes, that includes difficult and sometimes traumatizing and just really sad and hard and difficult themes. So I really liked how chapter 5 talked about students facing hardships every day, whether it's in the news, but also like bad things happen to all of us. Our students could be dealing with family issues like death or divorce, potentially abuse or addiction. I also think that realistic fiction also shows a light as to becoming a teenager, changing bodies, relationships for the first time, discovering your sexuality. And all of these are things that are typically censored. So these are very common teenage experiences, and we are basically trying to eliminate, or people that are trying to censor are trying to eliminate them from our curriculum. So where's the space for students to be able to learn and approach these concepts with a more hindsight and with more, self-awareness and with more like forethought? And potentially, if people are going to say, well, these students, if they don't see it, then they won't do it. If they won't hear about it, then they won't do it. I read the Literature of Risk article, which was the choice article that I got to pick. And it said that adolescents define themselves through high-risk behavior like drinking, smoking, drug use, reckless driving, unsafe sexual activity, disordered eating, self-mutilation, stealing, gang activity, and violence. So these things are happening, students are trying to define themselves, and that's going to happen. They're going to try things that maybe they shouldn't. I think the idea of like shielding students, again, like Penny Kittle and Kelly Gallagher, I think that that's just more damaging than anything. And it's also trying to keep them young forever, which is just unrealistic. All right, so another reason I think that I kind of mentioned it, but the importance of realistic fiction is that we can take the taboo off of these difficult concepts. And I think that's just really important for students' mental health. I honestly think that realistic fiction sometimes can be almost like a watered form of therapy. And I'll explain what I mean. It's just really because it's necessary sometimes, for us, and especially for teenagers, to take yourself personally outside of the situation in order to look at it clearly. So I think that that really happens when you're able to read about a character who's maybe going through teenage hardship and it's not actually you. So it's easier to critically analyze their behavior and their actions and maybe what was a good choice and what wasn't a good one, because it's not actually about their behavior, which makes it easier to not be biased. One of the articles that we had to read by Anita Class had a quote that by identifying and connecting with protagonists in contemporary realistic fiction, young adults can observe their own dilemmas with an objective eye. And I just think that's really important in order for them to be self-aware. And similarly, in the Changing Landscape piece, they said that for a novel to be read by youngsters today, children want to construct their own interpretations of authors speaking without authors speaking in a moralistic tone. So again, that idea of it's not coming from a parent or a teacher telling you what to do. You're just reading about a character who's struggling, and then in turn, you're able to kind of show a lens on your own struggles and potentially see that maybe you've behaved badly, or, say, hey, at least I didn't do what this person did. Similarly, from that same Changing Landscape article, they said that as contemporary authors continue to create children's literature, realism has taken on a brutal honesty and power. So again, this really connects to Chapter 5's idea of frankness. And this really, I think, is one of the leading reasons why realistic fiction can really hit home and hit hard. It's because it's so honest and frank and just tells it like it is. And any child I've ever met loves to just tell it like it is. That's how they deal with things, in a very frank manner. And so, yeah, I just really think that realistic fiction is a great resource for teachers to use in reading instruction, not only because they include literary devices, all of these things that make something good writing, but it also, again, it's coming home to these ideas of relevancy that we keep talking about, and it really helps to develop thoughtful, self-aware humans. And this will connect to their ability to be a good student as well, because if you're able to be self-aware, that really develops your thinking. They're going to become better thinkers all over the mark. And one thing I just should mention is that I think that realistic fiction and young adult literature can really connect well to canon pieces, and you can use them in collaboration with each other to teach how canon actually is relatable through the use of comparing it to a realistic fiction or any sort of young adult literature. And I know that we're going to be doing that in a few weeks, but I just thought it was important to mention. And to those people who would say that they think censorship and helicopter teaching and shielding students is the best way to go, I would just say we can't stop them from growing up. And I think it's really important to take these topics and make them not taboo. And I'll just end on a quote from the Literature of Risk article that I read. It was very, very good. And they were advocating for more writing about hardships in the teen experience. And they said that life, even at its darkest, can hold the promise of hope and positive change. And I think it's important to remember that, yes, while a realistic fiction novel for young adults could include really, hard and challenging and difficult themes, that doesn't mean that the entire novel is going to be depressing and dark and focusing on those things. They can still work through difficult concepts and issues while still having a positive and uplifting message. So yeah, I personally just adore realistic fiction. I can't wait to hear what you guys say. I hope that you're all staying safe and healthy. Bye.